I can't imagine, you know. I try to put myself in that. I'm like, I know them. I know they're up. We know they're up. They're not sleeping. You know, we were up too, and you know, we're just like.
We're exhausted.
I know. I bet.
Partially the losing on.
Where were you at when this happened?
I was at the park. I was at the park watching my son play football.
And then
I take
The night had fallen over a quiet suburban street, the kind where everyone thinks they know their neighbors, where the hum of traffic masks the secrets behind closed doors. It was a night like any other, or so it seemed, until a phone rang. On the other end, a neighbor's voice trembled, carrying words that would soon unravel a carefully constructed story, exposing a chilling truth hidden behind smiles and ordinary facades. Baby Emmanuel, a child who should have been protected, cherished, and safe, had vanished without a trace. For the first critical hours, the public clung to the narrative that had been offered, a story of tragedy, of a helpless child swept away by an accident beyond anyone's control. It was easier to believe in fate, in a cool twist of chance, than to imagine anything more sinister. But then came the call. Words whispered into that phone shattered the fragile illusion and suggested something far darker, something no one was ever meant to hear.
I can't imagine, you know. I try to put myself in that. I'm like, I know them. I know they're up. We know they're up. They're not sleeping. You know, we were up too, and you know, we're just like.
We're exhausted.
I know. I bet.
Partially the losing on.
Where were you at when this happened?
I was at the park. I was at the park watching my son play football.
And then I take the baby.
Yeah, that's how I am too. I go store.
It was horrible.
Yeah. It does.
Worst feeling ever.
It is.
Been balling until.
No, you're just numb right now.
Yeah.
You're just numb. You know.
The cops were treating us was horrible.
Really.
Yeah. It's been a horrible.
Don't want to let us know nothing.
There are a lot of good cops there. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
They're just doing their jobs, but it's a horrible feeling, you know.
No, yeah. So I seen that in the picture, like your baby was something wrong with the eyes. Is that what they're saying?
A little crazy eye.
Okay.
But it's getting corrected. He was corrected.
No, he was on no medication or nothing. Okay, so.
He's a healthy baby. So his little eye sometimes goes.
Yeah, my daughter was like that too. Yeah. So.
She was on medication for her eyes?
Yeah.
What was she?
Well, she had a genetic. It was a genetic disease. It was in December. That's when it's cold, you know.
Now let's return.
In that instant, the veil lifted. The carefully curated image of two devoted parents, crushed under the weight of loss, began to splinter. What emerged in its place was a tangled web of tension, half-truths, and contradictions that investigators couldn't ignore. Every pause in that conversation, every hesitation in their voices, carried meaning. Each word seemed to hint at secrets buried beneath the surface, at betrayals lurking just beyond the edges of their story. For those who listened closely, it wasn't just a sound of grief that echoed through the call. It was the echo of something unspoken, something too dangerous to admit aloud. The cracks in their story grew wider with every passing hour. Questions multiplied. Why did certain details not align? Why did their explanations shift depending on who was asking? And above all, why had they waited so long to speak, when time is the single most critical factor in finding a missing child? To the neighbors who had once offered sympathy, to the investigators piecing together fragments of evidence, the delay was damning. Silence in those early moments was not neutral. It was destructive, erasing opportunities to save Emmanuel, closing doors that might have led to the truth. And so, as the night stretched on, one haunting question lingered like a refrain, repeating itself in the minds of everyone who had heard that call. What did they know? And why did they remain silent until it was too late? That chilling uncertainty became the thread that tied the case together, a thread investigators would spend months pulling, hoping it would unravel the truth buried inside the Haro family's walls. A previously unknown recording of a phone call between one of Emmanuel's parents and a neighbor has cracked open the image the world thought it understood. For weeks, the story had been framed as one of pure tragedy, grieving parents crushed under the unbearable weight of losing their child. But this recording revealed something different, something far more unsettling. From the very first words, you can hear the raw tension seeping through the line. There are subtle admissions tucked between pauses and rushed explanations, hints that the narrative presented to the public was never the full truth. The carefully constructed facade of sorrow and innocence begins to unravel, piece by piece, under the weight of their own words. What stands out most is a shifting tone. On camera, the parent projected devastation, broken voices, teary eyes, an image designed to elicit sympathy. Yet in this private call, the mask slips. Their sorrow sounds rehearsed, almost brittle, while flashes of frustration and irritation slip through, betraying a deeper reality. It's in the way they cut each other off, the moments of impatience, the subtle contradictions that surface when they think no one else is listening. This isn't just grief. This is control, panic, and an attempt to shape a story before it collapses entirely. Authorities had described this recording as a turning point in the investigation. It isn't just another piece of evidence filed away in case documents. It's a window straight into the psychological state of the suspects at a time when their world was closing in. Investigators point to the call as proof of their awareness, their recognition that scrutiny was building and that the walls of deception were beginning to crack. Every syllable, every slip of the tongue is a reminder that grief can be faked, but frustration is harder to conceal. In this single recording, the illusion is stripped bare. It transforms a Haro from heartbroken parents into possible architect of a cover-up, forcing the world to ask not just what happened to Emmanuel, but how far his parents were willing to go to keep the truth hidden. To truly grasp the full weight of this phone call, we have to go back to where it all began. Baby Emmanuel Haro was only 7 months old when he disappeared, a fragile life cut from a world under circumstances that seemed, at first glance, both tragic and straightforward. The date was August 14th. According to Rebecca Haro, she had been attacked in a shopping center parking lot, blindsided in broad daylight. She claimed that in the chaos of that moment, her infant son was snatched from her arms, taken by a stranger, and vanished without a trace. The story was shocking, heartbreaking, and believable enough to spark an immediate wave of public sympathy. Communities mobilized, volunteers scoured neighborhoods, and law enforcement launched a desperate search operation. For hours, people clung to the image of a terrified mother and a stolen child, convinced this was a case of random violence, a cruel act that could have happened to anyone. But as investigators began piecing together the timeline, small cracks started to form in the carefully told story. Surveillance footage from the shopping center revealed no evidence of a struggle, no attacker, no frantic mother collapsing in chaos. Witnesses who had been in the area reported seeing nothing that matched Rebecca's account. Even more troubling were the inconsistencies in phone records and timestamp movements. Calls that should have lined up with her story didn't. Locations she claimed to be in didn't match the data. Each discovery chipped away at the narrative of a violent abduction. What started as a desperate community search slowly shifted into something far more chilling, a criminal investigation that pointed its focus directly back toward the very people who were crying out for help. The more investigators dug, the less the story held up. And soon, a devastating possibility began to emerge, that Emmanuel had never been kidnapped at all. This realization transformed everything. What once looked like tragedy now reeked of deception. And in that deception, authorities began to see the outline of something darker, a family hiding secrets, a timeline riddled with lies, and a baby whose fate might never have matched the story told in front of cameras. A troubling pattern of inconsistencies began to emerge, and with each discovery, the foundation of the Haros story started to crumble. Phone records, the type of evidence that rarely lies, painted a timeline starkly different from the one Jake and Rebecca had presented. They claimed to be in certain places at certain times, but the record suggested otherwise, placing them in locations that directly contradicted their sworn statements. What they told investigators and what the evidence revealed were not two versions of the same truth. They were entirely separate realities. Then came the witness accounts. Neighbors and bystanders reported hearing raised voices, heated arguments, and emotional confrontations within the Haro household. These weren't minor squabbles or fleeting disagreements. They were described as explosive and recurring. Yet, when asked directly, Jake and Rebecca painted a picture of stability, of love and unity in the face of tragedy. Their silence about these arguments wasn't just a small omission. It became a glaring red flag. But perhaps the most chilling revelation arrived with the surveillance footage. Investigators combed through hours of video, searching for any sign of Emmanuel being taken, carried, or even seen outside of the home after August 5th. They found nothing. The absence of proof was louder than any admission. The cameras told a story the parents had not, that Emmanuel may never have left that house alive after that date. It was the last time he was confirmed to be seen by anyone outside the Haro family, and from that moment forward, his existence became a question rather than a certainty. Adding to the weight of suspicion were the messages exchanged between Jake and Rebecca themselves. They were raw, emotional, and filled with blame. Stress over finances, accusations about parenting, resentment about responsibilities, all of it bubbled to the surface in texts and voicemails investigators later uncovered. These weren't the conversations of grieving parents blindsided by tragedy. They hinted at a household under extreme pressure, one where the breaking point had perhaps already been reached. Piece by piece, investigators realized they weren't confronting the tragic story of a family robbed of their child by fate. They were unraveling a narrative carefully constructed to mislead, to buy time, and perhaps to bury a truth far darker than anyone dared to imagine. The shockwaves of Emmanuel's disappearance rippled far beyond the walls of the Haro household. At first, neighbors, friends, and even strangers clung to sympathy, rallying around the grieving family in what appeared to be their darkest hour. But as time passed and the inconsistencies began to stack up, that sympathy slowly shifted into something colder, something sharper. Fear crept in. Disbelief grew. Heartbreak hardened into suspicion. The same community that had lit candles, tied ribbons, and whispered prayers now found itself asking a haunting question. Was a real danger not outside, but much closer to home? As details unraveled, so too did trust. Longtime friends of the Haros admitted privately that certain moments no longer sat right with them. Strained behaviors, tense arguments, the subtle distance between the parents. Once brushed aside as quirks of stress or exhaustion, those memories now resurfaced in an entirely new light. Neighbors replayed conversations in their minds, questioning every word, every expression, every excuse. The unsettling thought that they might have missed something, that they might have stood only a few feet away from the truth, began to gnaw at them. Meanwhile, social media turned into a double-edged sword. On one hand, it became the loudspeaker for justice. Strangers across the country amplified Emmanuel's story, demanding answers, organizing digital vigils, and keeping his name alive in the endless churn of news cycles. Yet on the other hand, it also became a breeding ground for speculation and rumor. Every unverified claim spread like wildfire. Every blurry photo, every overheard snippet of conversation, every anonymous tip became evidence in the court of public opinion. What began as a united call for answers transformed into a frenzy where fact and fiction collided daily. And in the midst of it all, one haunting question echoed louder than the rest. How could a community that watched, that cared, have been deceived so thoroughly? The neighbors who had waved to Rebecca in passing, the friends who had once trusted Jake, the townspeople who believed in the innocence of a grieving family, all were forced to reckon with the uncomfortable truth. Were the signs always there, hidden in plain sight? Or had the community chosen to look away until it was too late? As investigators dug deeper and the public scrutinized every available detail, three dominant theories began to solidify, each one carrying its own set of disturbing implications. At first, many clung to the simplest explanation, that Emmanuel's death could have been a result of a natural cause or a tragic accident. Perhaps illness had struck suddenly. Perhaps exhaustion or stress had led to a careless mistake. But as the weeks passed and evidence of neglect, inconsistency, and bursts of anger began to surface, this theory rapidly lost credibility. What once might have been explained away as misfortune no longer fit with a mounting trail of contradictions. It wasn't enough to say that fate had taken Emmanuel. The evidence suggested something else entirely, something preventable. The second theory, and the one most heavily pushed in those early days, was that of a stranger abduction. Rebecca's claim of a violent attack in a shopping center seemed horrifyingly believable at first. It was a kind of story that plays on every parent's worst fear, a child snatched in broad daylight by someone lurking in the shadows. For a time, the community rallied around this narrative, convinced the predator was at large. Yet as surveillance footage rolled in, the cracks widened. Not a single frame showed a struggle. No witness or a woman with a baby attacked or chased. No one matched the supposed description of a kidnapper. Witness testimony directly contradicted the timeline given by the Haros. Piece by piece, this story collapsed under its own weight. That left the third theory, the one investigators began to treat not as speculation, but as a most probable reality: family involvement. This was not the conclusion anyone wanted to accept, but it became harder to ignore with every inconsistency revealed. Investigators uncovered not just gaps in the parent accounts, but a pattern of troubling behavior that suggested something far more sinister than bad luck. The psychological profile of both parents revealed a chilling duality: public displays of sorrow, tears, and pleas for help, while privately they exhibited anger, deception, and blame toward one another. It painted the portrait of a family desperately trying to conceal the unthinkable. And with that, the spotlight shifted fully onto the Haros, not as grieving parents, but as suspect in their own child's disappearance. One haunting truth remains at the center of this tragedy: baby Emmanuel is gone, and the complete story of his final hours is yet to be uncovered. His disappearance is not just about a missing child. It is about the fragility of trust, the bond between parent and child that should be unbreakable, and the devastating reality that unfolds when those entrusted with protection choose deception instead. What began as a narrative of sorrow and innocence has unraveled into something far darker: a story of silence, manipulation, and unanswered questions. For investigators, the trail of evidence has been like peeling back layers of a carefully woven mask. Each inconsistency, each contradiction, revealed not just a flaw in a Haros story, but a deliberate attempt to hide the truth. And yet, even as the pieces continue to fall into place, the full picture remains elusive. Emmanuel's final moments are not fully accounted for. His voice, the voice of a helpless infant who should have been loved and shielded from harm, has been silenced. All that remains are fragments: phone records, surveillance footage, whispered arguments, and the absence of a child who deserves so much more. But one truth cuts through the lies: Emmanuel's story cannot end with silence. His absence demands attention, reflection, and accountability. It demands that those responsible are held to the highest measure of justice, and that his name is not forgotten in the noise of trials, speculation, or fading headlines. Every child deserves to be remembered, but Emmanuel's case stands as a chilling reminder of what happens when a system of trust collapses from within. And yet, even as the facts become harder to ignore, one chilling question lingers in the hearts of those who follow this case. Will justice ever truly be enough? Can any sentence, any verdict, ever make up for a life stolen before it had the chance to begin? Emmanuel's cries went unheard in the moments when he needed protection most. Now, it is a responsibility of others, investigators, the community, and all who carry his memory, to ensure his story is not buried in silence.